And welcome everybody to a short video we are running here and recording to give everybody an initial introduction to monitoring and evaluation for the reporter breach service. The most important part about this is that we have three people here from different councils who are going to give us the benefit of their experience. So, quick introduction. My name is John Drinkwater. I coordinate the monitoring and evaluation working group here at MHCLG for part of the ODP process.
My name is Stacy Pring and I am the validation manager at Medway Council. So my team includes receiving all enforcement complaints.
I'm Jo Meneaud. I'm a principal planner at Gloucester City Council.
I'm Dave Chamberlain from Barnet Council. I'm an ICT delivery manager, and we've got a small team of people within planning and building control who do technical related things.
So let's just jump in. I think, Jo, you're able to give us a quick review of what we mean when we talk about enforcement cases, right? Help us out?
Yep. So I think we all know that planning enforcement is a key role within any local authority planning department. It's a service that's always busy, and it's a service that receives a wide range of complaints. I think it's also fair to say that it's a service that members of the public and councillors have very high expectations of. They report a complaint, they want it looked into, and they want it dealt with. Complaints that do come into enforcement are very wide-ranging, and you never quite know what you're going to expect. Most commonly, those complaints are about building works being carried out to residential or commercial properties, maybe uses within buildings changing, or complaints about building sites. One of the most common of those being them working outside of maybe their permitted hours, or the amount of mud that they might leave on local roads. That's something that really upsets members of the public. But we also get those complaints that are sort of loosely related to planning, but they're not things we have any control over. And that might be things like boundary disputes, or who's responsible for a fence, or things like hedges overhanging a footpath. And then, well, we certainly find at Gloucester, we get all those other complaints that no one's quite sure who should be dealing with them. So things like someone's flying a drone over my property, or my neighbour's parking his work van on his driveway and blocking my view down the road. So in our experience, enforcement teams will often spend quite a lot of time dealing with non-planning related issues. And their role is almost a peacekeeping between neighbours. They can act as like a general advisory service to members of the public and councillors, and they also spend quite a bit of time passing complaints to other departments or organisations, or trying to work out who they need to pass those complaints to. And dealing with all these non-planning related issues takes us away from the work that we should actually be doing and the work that we have control over.
Jo, that was a good explanation of why the report breach service might be of interest to the council in Gloucester. Stacey, could you give us an intro to what life's like in Medway and why potentially a reporter breach service was of interest?
We have the same issues. Prior to reporter breach, emails was our method of customers reporting breaches. So people didn't know what information to provide to us because there's no structure to an email, and it's quite an emotive subject as well, enforcement, because they feel like somebody's encroaching on their privacy. Our baseline data when we went into this was that 60% of the cases that we received on our desk, we could not progress on the first try. We then started looking at what made up that 60%, and it was 4 reasons, very similar to what Jo's just said there. They've either already had planning permission, the works were permitted development, they were not planning matters, that could be civil, or they might be for highways, different departments, or we simply needed different information. And it's not always more information, it's just different information. What's relevant to a complainant is very different to what we need to be able to establish whether there is actually a planning breach or not. So simply put, without structure, it was a frustrating system for both customers and councils.
Okay, that makes sense. Dave, if I can bring you in, if that's all right.
Everything that's been said there absolutely is true. Particularly the complaints have a large number of things that we have no control over, and we used to receive essays, and absolutely we share that. We certainly get a lot of information about non-planning matters, so that is in common. Where possibly we're slightly different is we're we don't want to filter out too many calls. We actually made a different version of the report of breach service, whereas the official version took people through find out if you need planning permission, and for very good reasons. The persona we were working towards was called Mr. A, who is angry about something. He's a bit short-tempered. He needs to get something off his chest, has a tendency to write long essays. And we want to hear what Mr. A has to say, but we want to direct him, and we don't want to lose him. We don't think he's got the patience to go through that. So it's a slightly shorter form we wanted.
Got it. So moving on to deciding what to measure. Stacey, you could tell us about what you did in Medway.
So we were going back to those 4 reasons: whether it already had planning permission, they were permitted development, whether they were planning matters, whether they weren't civil or not. We very much concentrated on those areas at Medway. When we joined the working group, we were building the service, we just had those were in our mind the whole time, just try to juice them, but not necessarily in a negative way, but in a way to make sure that the customer wasn't waiting 5 days for us to come back on an email to say it's not a planning matter, but it's a highways matter, and we're redirecting them. So when we were building the service, that we had those in our mind, and we were very much with our corporate parenting hat on, making sure that if somebody did try to report a fly tipping, that we didn't just say no thank you, we did actually give them the correct guidance to the right departments. That was our focus when we joined the group: reduce them, but in a way that the customer gets an instant answer, and we can spend our time on those cases as well. So that was our approach.
Dave, you did quite a bit of work about people who drop out of the service. What's a good reason and what's a bad reason, right? And that sounds very much like what Stacey was mentioning there. Can you cover that a little, do you think?
Sure. This is a metrics discussion. When we first did our metrics, we decided what it was we wanted to measure. But when we first made the dashboard, it was really quite confusing. We thought, great, we got all this information, but as actually looking at it, we thought, is that good? Is that bad? What does that mean? And it took quite a few iterations of working on making it more meaningful before we got there. So a really good example was measuring people dropping off. They start filling in the form and then they don't finish it. Well, you think you want as many people to get to the end as possible, but actually you don't really, because there are some sections where people decide whether it's one of the areas where we can do something about. And if they realize, actually, what I'm going to complain about is nothing to do with anything that you can do something about, there's no point in me going on any further. So we'd view that as a good dropout. Whereas other dropouts, where they leave the page because they're having trouble marking the area on a map, that's a bad dropout.
I just want to cover a little bit of something about the measures that we chose as a working group and in the end landed on as being the important ones. This is the design that the working group came up with to measure what the impact of this service is. On the left-hand side, we've got residents, whoever takes the contact, the enforcement officer and the manager, and these are the benefits to those people of this new service that we've introduced. And if they are the benefits, then on the right-hand side, we've got the measures, the things we want to count. So we want to know, of all the complaints that land with the team, how many of those came through report a breach and how many still keep on coming through email and phone calls. We've got questions about what happens when somebody is interacting with that PlanX service, how many people start and how many people get to the end. Because if you've got 60% of people dropping out without getting to a sensible endpoint, maybe there's a problem there. And then there's the biggie, which is counting the calls that come in or the emails that come in that are associated with this. Then how much time do we save within the enforcement and validation teams? Finally, is that information useful to a manager? I wanted to hear your view, Joe, on what really is important, what you really want to know when it comes to actually measuring and working out whether this service is any good or not. You had some thoughts on that, didn't you?
I did, yes. And I think we felt that because we are just about to launch Report a Breach, so we've been doing all the background work on collecting data, collecting the number of complaints, where those complaints come from, who's made them, what they're about, are they planning related. And I think one of the key things for us were that complaints were coming from so many different places.
Mhm.
So they were coming via the phone direct to enforcement, they were going to our enforcement inbox, they were going to our Here to Help contact centre, they were coming through to the daily planning officer duty rota system. They were coming from lots of places, and we needed to get them coming in just through one place, which is, you know, one of the great things for us about Report a Breach. And the key things for us really are to find out if bringing in the Report a Breach is going to reduce the overall number of complaints, reduce the overall number of non-planning related complaints. Will the new system give us all the information we need so that we don't need to keep going back to people and asking for additional information? And then essentially, what do case officers and the enforcement officers, how well do they feel that the new system works? And for us, those are the key things that are important as part of bringing in the Report a Breach service.
And thank you. And I guess just deciding what data you're going to collect to help you work that out is important. I just wanted to ask you, Dave, what your experiences were in terms of getting the information potentially out of the enforcement team, potentially out of the contact team, out of the back office system. Were there any difficulties there, or was it all super easy?
To answer that, it'd be helpful if you brought up your slide just now. I really like the idea of showing your measures of how successful your service is and what was important for against the reasons why you decided to implement the service in the first place. And to anybody who's thinking of starting Report a Breach service, or any service for that matter, is you should always start with a really good think about why are we doing this? What, you know, where do we view the real benefits? It's a bit like a business case, you know. And to do that, you've got to do, as that slide suggests, you've got to look at all the key holders. What are their user stories? Why is this, you know, why do they think this is going to be a good thing? It's going to vary slightly from council to council. Jo's just been through some of her Gloucester, and I just really recommend that everybody does that. Spend some time making your user stories, including the user stories for your residents and all the people who enter the call. Us at Barnet, we decided to launch the service. We started with the user stories, and as a trial, then we decided to at the same time decide how to measure each one. So as soon as we thought of the user stories, one of the things we noted down is, well, that's all very good. We want to achieve that. How will we measure it? So it was there from the beginning, and it meant that we brought people into the picture who we wouldn't normally have brought in. We had a web designer with us who was going to be able to do the Google Analytics. We were going to be deciding where we were going to advertise the service. And so I think we were lucky we did that. It helped us, and by thinking about how we'd measure stuff from the beginning, it just worked quite well, and I really recommend that.
Got it. I understand that the Barnet team focus on user-centered design and focus a lot of resource on doing that. Stacey, you had a different approach, right, Medway? Your world's a little bit different today, as I understand.
Yeah, I can recognise that is a good approach. But the reality that I had at the time was I overheard a conversation at an ODP away day. I heard that Buckinghamshire was going to be launching this new service. And I was like, okay, this is a problem at Medway, so let me become involved in this. And it was just me initially, so I didn't have the opportunity to go through and do lots of different user journeys. I live and breathe this every day, all these reports coming in. So it was more instinct for me to go in and look at those first bits of data, how many invalid, why, and just build a service that addressed those. Everything else was going to come in as an improvement later on. I can recognise that the full-on approach is a good way of doing it. I just didn't have the resource to do that.
There are benefits to doing it and involving everybody early on, because then later on in the process, when you want some information, of course, they already know what you're talking about and they may be brought in, but it isn't always possible for everybody. Okay, so we've got to the stage where we know what we're doing, we know why we're doing it, we're ready with the service, we've worked out where the data is going to be collected, because we want to know what the benefit is. But there's another piece to this. This isn't just about did it work or didn't it? Well, what are we learning? That means we might tweak things and change things. And I know, Stacey, early on, you were really quite involved in trying to have an early look at the data and see what it told you. Can you give us any examples of what you learned early on and whether you made any changes because of that?
I think when we looked at it earlier on, we only had those baseline data. So I had no clue at the time that PlanX was even going to be able to provide half of the data it provided us with, being able to see when people are dropping off, if they're dropping off when it's a civil matter, if they're dropping off when it's a permitted development matter. Those bits of information I never knew that I would even have the option to have. So for us, it was just like a constant learning. So I don't necessarily know that I would have changed anything, because that was just a reality at the time. But I was impressed with so much data, and even just being able to tell whether somebody's using their mobile or desktop. You know, I just didn't know I'd have access to that data. So it's been really helpful.
Brilliant. Dave, did you get any learnings early on that made you question whether this is working or not?
It took a couple of months after we launched the service. You know, every day I was looking, I think, come on, when are we going to get it actually took quite a while before we really knew. It took a good few months. One of the measures that was really, really helpful was seeing how many people as a proportion were using the form. Joe earlier talked about the many different ways people complain.
Yeah.
They phone, they call the contact centre. We had two forms. We already had an existing form for a complaint, and now we had this second one with PlanX. And what we swapped the two over. We swapped to the new form, and we then just saw an immediate and steady increase in the number of people who are complaining by the form. So they're seeing it, they like it, they're using it, and that was really good to see.
And Stacey, top line results for you?
Yeah, we went a different approach. We decided to remove all other options of being able to report a breach.
Yes.
So if somebody emailed, we would reply with a link to the service, and we wouldn't accept any other cases. Well, the only exception to that is if it was a internal department. Anybody else reporting a breach, and that would be whether it be a resident or a councillor, we would ask them to go down the report a breach. We find out if embedded, we can go down that route. And I was very cautious of that. I didn't know that's going to be a popular decision, so I was ready to change that if I needed to. We haven't had a single complaint, a few grumbles, but no complaints at all about that option. I think people see the value in it, and we did presentations to councillors as well. So yeah, they all supported that decision.
And how's it looking so far in terms of the impact then? So have you seen a difference in the number of cases that enforcement officers are having to deal with or anything like that?
Yes, looking at the PlanX data, we can easily see that over 70 reports have not made it through to us. So that's over 70 times a customer has been able to get an instant answer. So going back to Dave's point earlier on, the good people leaving it on a positive way. So that is over 70 cases. You times that by 15 minutes, which is the time it would take for us to read it and reply. That's a big time saving. Plus, more importantly, the customer is getting an instant answer, which I think is really valuable as well. And also for the cases that we did get through, before that was 60%. In November and December, that was down to 10. So we received a massive reduction on both reducing the number of complaints and the quality of the complaints.
Dave, same to you?
The ones I'd like to draw attention to is one of the things we're measuring was people who got to the complaints within 2 clicks of searching for it from the website. And when we launched, that was 28%. After a few months, it was 66%, and again, steady increase there. So that was meeting the criteria of easy to find.
So that is, it was on the website. You count how easy it is for people to find by saying, if you land on the website and you can find this service within 2 clicks, that's been easy to find.
Absolutely.
Okay, I understand. And I think that points to 2 levels of measures that we've been talking about. There's the basics. Really useful to know, how many cases are you getting in, and what proportion of those are proper planning cases and what proportion aren't, right? That's the first thing. Second thing, when you get them, are they easier to deal with now? And Dave, you just mentioned a couple of extra things, which are additional, you might call them optional measures, which the web team might be able to help with, which is how easy is it for people to find this service?
I've got a couple of other things on our sheet which are possibly less impressive. We'd love to measure how the different officers involved find it, and in measuring the time and what have you, and that was very difficult. And so for those areas we found difficult, we simply do a staff survey and get their perception on whether things are better or worse. So you don't see this nice line of percentages going up. Every 2 months you might do a survey and get an idea whether it's better than it was or wasn't. It's not great. We've got another measure which is to do with whether the calls are coming down in the call centre. We'd love to measure that, and on our metrics and evaluation sheet it's staying very steady. It says NA, 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 simply because we haven't been able to measure that yet. We have the call site stats from the call centre. Great, we've got the access to the back end. What we didn't manage to do was to go through the right channels to get them to categorise the right sort of calls so that we get data from it.
Okay, you might say, yes, you had 50 planning calls. What was it about? Don't know. Yeah,
it wasn't categorised where we wanted, and we've kept that on our monitoring evaluation sheets because it's saying, don't forget this. We still want to know it. It's something we've got to crack later, and I think that's a message for anybody who's about to do this. There will be things that you will find hard to measure, and nobody's going to judge you badly because you can't measure something. Measure what you can, be aware of what you can't. Everything you measure should be linked to those objectives you wanted to achieve in the first place.
So I just want to ask if you've got anything else you want to add to what Dave and Stacey have been saying over the last period.
I think it's fair to say we've had lots of good results from other councils about how successful report a breach has been. For us, it's trying to get everything come through one channel. So at the moment, I'm on the promotion to councillors and planning committee, and encouraging everybody to use it, explaining how it's going to work so much better with our back office processes as well. And I think for us, we've only got one enforcement officer. Most councils will have 2, 3, or even a much bigger team. So it's a lot more intimate for us, and we can probably get some better insights in some way because we're just dealing with one enforcement officer, and they're really excited about it and looking forward to it coming forward.
Brilliant. That's interesting. So having covered that, let's just go through the top tips. Stacey?
So get you as many people on board as possible. So that might be your councillors, enforcement teams. Initially, it was just me at Medway, but then we brought a planning officer who used to be an enforcement officer along to the workshops. So that really helped have that contact with the enforcement team as well, and doing the presentations for councillors.
Got it. Thank you. Dave?
Think about how you're going to measure at the same time as you're thinking about why are we doing this, do we want to do this, and reach out to people in your council, people who you might not even know exist at the moment. Stacey mentioned earlier how she got some stats from the website or something that you didn't even know existed before. That's great to hear. I told John yesterday that when I first joined ODP, I spent the first couple of face-to-face meetings hiding from him because at the time I knew I had absolutely nobody who could get meaningful data, and it was just easier not to speak to John. So don't be like that. Just face up to the fact it's awkward when you don't know how to measure stuff. Talk about it, get help, see what's there. Again, when we reached out to the council, the web team turned out to be fantastic. Really, really useful. Knowing that there was a resident experience or customer experience team in the council that previously I hadn't even known about. Again, very useful. You do reach out. So it's the same as Stacey's saying. Involve other people if you can once you get going.
There was another one as well, John, just in terms of if you are thinking about launching this service, you've got some decisions to make. You've got the decision to which of the two options you're going to go for. You can launch the service with or without find out if embedded. And the important data that you're going to need for that is how many of the reports do you get, whether they can't be pressed because they're permitted development. And if that's really high, you might want to embed the find out if it's not so high, you might not want to. So I think it's about understanding the two different options that you've got available to you. I'm sure, Dave, I would be happy to do a demo, to any of your council or your colleagues, to show you how it works, and then you can have a decision about the two options. And the only other thing I wanted to mention, because that caught Medway out and it stopped us going live for about 5 weeks, was PIA. Different councils operate different systems, got different length of times. Our DPIA is quite long and it took a while to get it approved.
That's the data protection
impact assessment. Yeah. Right. And it did prevent us going live when we initially wanted to. So if I had, that is actually a lesson that I would have learned, start that earlier in the process. And I'm very happy to share ours.
Great. Thank you, Stacey.
I said before, we haven't got any metrics from our call centre. Now that started really well. We spoke to the call centre and we couldn't believe our luck when they shared their back-end metrics with us. And we could plug that into our Power BI. Fantastic. But things didn't go very well from there. And we just couldn't get the right people to engage, do what we wanted. Really awkward. We went about it the wrong way. We were more technical side of planning, speaking to the more technical side of people from the customer experience, and then no matter who we went to, it all went wrong. We should have gone within our own department to planning and building control and said, who is our link to the call centre? Please, can you do this for us? So we just went about it the way. First up, an example.
Thank you. Joe's too early days for me to ask.
It is really, but I'm very grateful for the advice that Stacey gave me about the data protection assessment. We've got a standard form that needs completing. I've never done anything like that before. It's much easier to write a planning committee report than it is to complete one of those assessments. Stacey gave me some really good hints and tips on completing that, so that was really, really helpful. That was a challenge for me, definitely, but I haven't experienced any negativity from the proposal, and I suppose what I should have mentioned earlier as a benefit is we have been looking at all our enforcement processes as part of launching the service. So how we deal with them, how we acknowledge them, how we go back to complainants, how often we do that, what time periods we should be doing that within. So it's helped us, pushed us into action to look at all those different processes as well. So that's a big benefit to us and to customers as well. So that's sort of a side product of launching it.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. Thank you. Okay. Well, just to wrap up for people watching the video, everybody on this call is part of the Monitoring and Evaluation Working Group, and that's where a set of the first councils and ODP get together and together work out the best way to approach, how to understand how the services are performing. So it's not something that I or anybody else in MHCRG it has to be this. All the stuff that we're doing here has been developed and thought through and tested by councils and the representatives. Stacey, Dave, Joe, thank you very much for joining us. Really good. If you have any further questions, just contact the working group. You can contact them via your community manager or directly. I think you'll find a group of people who are really happy to help out.